Project Condign was an intelligence study into the UFO phenomenon carried out by the Defense Intelligence Staff in the Ministry of Defense. And I was involved in the early to mid-90s in the work that led to the setting up of this study. But I had been posted from the UFO project by the time the study was actually carried out. Project Condign was an attempt to do a proper intelligence assessment of the UFO phenomenon. And that's why I say that in many respects it's one of the final report. This is a scan of the front image, the front page of the final report. The Condign report, the final report, is arguably one of the most important UFO documents of all time. And it ran to over 468 pages, I think. At the time, its classification was secret, UK eyes only. And what I mean, when I say an intelligence assessment on this, what do I mean? I mean, instead of the work that I did on the UFO project, which was investigating sightings as they came in on a one-by-one basis, trying to give my best assessment of what the solution was in any particular case, a proper intelligence assessment attempted to draw together all the data that we had and really answer the more important strategic question. What is all this? You know, never mind the case-by-case analysis. Put it all together. What have we got? What are we dealing with? Is it hostile? Is it under intelligent control? What is it? And Project Condign's final report has been partially declassified and released. Some bits of it have still not been released. John Burroughs and Jim Penniston for many years had health issues which they associated with their UFO encounter, and which specifically they believed came from their proximity to it. And they knew that a Geiger counter had been used to take readings, and they knew about that Defense Intelligence Staff document. And for many years, John and Jim were battling the VA to get proper treatment. Now, they couldn't get treatment without a proper diagnosis, and they couldn't get a diagnosis because the USAF would not release their military medical records. And they had hit a complete brick wall on this until a combination of myself working with a crusading attorney called Pat Frascogna, who has done hundreds of hours of pro bono work on John and Jim's behalf and is a real hero in this story, drew John and Jim's attention specifically to this paragraph in Project Condign's final report. Now, bear in mind, this was a British intelligence study, highly classified. At the time it was written, it was never conceived that it was going to be released. And essentially it says, yeah, the witnesses that encountered the UFO in Rendlesham Forest were probably irradiated by it. Once John and Jim's attorney put that document to the VA and said, hey, wait a minute, you've denied, the US government has denied that this ever took place. You might want to read this British intelligence assessment. Guess what? The VA settled. Now, I think that's a reminder of two things. Firstly, that Sometimes the answers are there, but you've got to go look for them. And this was tucked away in working paper 3 to Annex F to volume 3 or something like that. And sometimes, as I know full well, and then John will be very familiar with this, sometimes the best place to hide a book is in a library. That was there. That had actually been, that part of Project Condign's final report had been declassified since 2000. Pardon me, since 2006. But it was only fairly recently that John and Jim's attorney were able to put that to the VA. And on the basis of that, the VA settled. The second thing, of course, that story should tell us is that, my goodness, we do owe a debt of loyalty to those who have served in the military. And I think that what happened to John and Jim and others was nothing short of shameful. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we forget that the loyalty that flows up the chain of command from people like John Burroughs and Jim Penniston also is owed the other way down, from the top down. Just to show you the headline conclusions of Project Condign, that's taken from the executive summary. Again, you'll see at the beginning of that quote how we use the phrase UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. And we did that for a couple of reasons. If I'm being mischievous, I'll say that it sometimes made it a bit more difficult for people to use FOI if we were calling things UAP and not UFO. But the other reason is that within government, there are skeptics, there are believers, and there are a whole bunch of people in the middle. Some people in the Ministry of Defense thought UFOs were extraterrestrial. Some thought it was a complete waste of taxpayers' money, and probably the biggest number of people just didn't really know. But when we wanted to get funding for intelligence studies like Project Condign, we knew presentationally we were not going to get funding for UFO studies, but we might just, and we did, get funding for UAP studies. It's just a little sleight of hand, but that's the sort of thing that governments do. So that's the from the executive summary. This is kind of interesting. Some recommendations for pilots who encounter UAPs. And, you know, no attempt should be made to outmaneuver a UAP during interception. Well, I think it's pretty clear we're not talking about weather balloons here. And that second quote I love. It's just basically saying, whatever it is, don't mess with it, just get out of its way. Now, this I think gets to the heart of, you know, we talk a lot about UFO secrecies and cover-ups and conspiracies. This I think gets to the heart of the question, and I think I think there was a woman who asked a question about this. Why the secrecy? Here's my take on it. This, again, is a direct quote from Project Condign's final report. And it makes it abundantly clear that the real issue here, so far as intelligence is concerned, is technology acquisition. And also the idea that if there's advanced technology that can be kind of figured out from a better understanding of the UFO phenomenon, A, it would be great to have it, but B, it would be disastrous if somebody else got it first. And And again, I think you can see at the end, I guess, going back to the central theme of this conference, what does the government really know? Well, there's kind of good news and bad news. The good news is that, yeah, there are some pretty bright people working on this issue in government over the years. The bad news, as you can see from the end, is some of them are trying to make a weapon out of it. Sorry about that, but it is what it is. If the military and the intelligence community study UFOs, that's going to be the focus of interest. What can we derive from this? And I think it raises a wider question. It's interesting looking at UFO research around the world that most governments that have looked at this phenomenon, in most cases, the research effort has been embedded in the Air Force or in the DoD. And that, I think, when the history of the UFO topic comes to be written, if such a time comes, people will say that a lot of how it played out the way it played out because of who was doing it. And if you embed UFO projects in the Air Force, in the military, and if you get military intelligence doing it, this is kind of the mindset that you will get. With that in mind, it's I think, quite noteworthy that France is one country that does it a different way. In France, the government UFO investigative program has always been embedded in the French National Space Center, CNES. And I think when you get that, it gives you a slightly different focus on it. I mention that because I think sometimes we forget, and this is a point about government, that where you embed something has a huge bearing on the way in which that subject will be handled. Again, I'm just trying with my perspective on this, having done this for the Ministry of Defense, to try and give you some insights into how we viewed this subject and how we handled this. Because I hear a lot of nonsense sometimes spoken about what governments do and think and know about this. And I'm trying to give you things which are all tied back to verifiable government documents. Again, that's focusing on the kind of technology acquisition aspects of all this. A document that I have not quoted from, but I will while I remember it, is not the final report, but while Project Condign was not yet commissioned, but was being set up, some of the internal documents that basically said why we want to do this study and why we need to do it had one of the most bizarre and surreal quotes that I've ever seen in a government document on UFOs. And it said, in the absence of any overt hostility, there are perhaps three possibilities. This is a defense intelligence document. Three possibilities. A, military reconnaissance. B, scientific study. Or C, tourism. Now, when I read that document, and it was, I think it was written to me, it was part of the, this is why we need to be doing this. I probably smirked too, but in 2010, I attended 2 scientific conferences in the UK, sponsored by the Royal Society. The first one was called the detection of extraterrestrial life and the consequences for science and society. And the second, even more provocatively, was entitled Towards a Societal Agenda on Extraterrestrial Life. And these conferences didn't generate anywhere near the level of interest that I would expect and hope, but they were multidisciplinary conferences at which not just astronomers and astrophysicists and cosmologists came together, but psychologists, theologians, sociologists, and everyone really attempted to look at this issue of what it would mean to discover extraterrestrial life. John mentioned the work that his wife Victoria did on the religious implications of that. The religious implications of discovering extraterrestrial life was a big part of that. But the point with all that is that knowing what we know about the age of the universe and knowing what we know about star formation, it's theoretically possible that there are civilizations out there with a billion-year head start on us. We're not realistically going to have anything to teach them about science and technology. But they might just be interested in the more abstract things. Our art, our literature, our music, our poetry, our political systems, and yes, our wonderful, wide, open spaces and hence tourism in the document. So what sounded like a ridiculous statement that should never have found its way into an intelligence assessment on UFOs was actually a fairly, I thought, spot-on remark. But food for thought. Again, going back to themes of what governments know, this is another part of the, you have to look for this thing. I mean, when the Ministry of Defense did have to release this under FOI, of course, they found a whole bunch of fairly skeptical quotes in the study, but the journalists didn't find quotes like that. Because basically, no one's going to plow through a 468-page report. No, everyone's going to go to just a few bits of the executive summary, but buried deeper in the report are statements like that, which again indicate that other nations are looking at this too. And there is some redaction of that document. I do remember what it says under the X's, but my secrecy oath does bind me for life. And while I can talk fairly openly about things that the MOD have declassified, if they haven't declassified, I can't talk about it. I'm not a whistleblower. Sorry.